So with all the recent press that the F-22 has been getting lately, I figure I'd do a video about the F-22. Those of you that have watched my previous videos know that I was a weapons troop on the F-16 and the A-10, but I worked on the F-22 briefly while it was still a test aircraft. It was the last airframe that I ever worked on as a weapons troop in the Air Force. And that was a very interesting experience, and I just wanted to let you guys know what that was like, working on a classified aircraft that was still in its testing phase. How I got to work on the F-22 is I was actually supposed to go work on the F-15 in Japan. After leaving Korea, when you leave Korea, you pretty much get to go wherever you want, whatever base you want to go to. And I selected Japan as the assignment that I wanted to go to because I really wanted to work on the F-15. I thought it was just a cool plane. It was one of the sexiest planes ever, and I wanted to work on it. But my wife was pregnant at the time. You know, when I went home on leave 8 months prior, we had a surprise. And at that point, she was too pregnant to fly overseas. They didn't want to fly her overseas. And rather than me go over there without her, I simply asked to be diverted. And I get a call one day from the weapons flight chief for the 411th Test Squadron at Edwards Air Force Base, saying that they were selecting me to come work on the F-22 during its final phases of testing. So I was actually really ecstatic. That was insane to be considered, to work on that aircraft. I considered it an honor, and I was just really, really excited to go work on the F-22, especially being an aviation buff like I am. Being able to work on this plane that at the time nobody knew anything about it. It was only spoke about in like complete secrecy. No one had ever seen one in person except for a few people that had seen it during test flights come to their base. However, when I got to Edwards and I got on the flight and started working on the F-22, there were a few things that I noticed that were very different than working on the F-16, a fourth generation aircraft, and the A-10, an aircraft from the 60s, to working on this plane that was fairly new. Although the F-22 has been in development since the 80s, but it was still considered, it's a fourth generation aircraft, and therefore much more modern than even like the Block 52 F-16s was. So the first thing I noticed was that there were more civilians working on the aircraft than military people. So for those who don't know, the F-22 is actually a collaborative effort from a lot of different defense contractors. So everyone's got their hand in that pie. In fact, and it's some things like for instance, the wings were part of the wing is made by Boeing and the rest of the wing is made by Lockheed Martin. Of course, the engines are made by Pratt and Whitney. The gun and some of the avionics are made by GE. So the thing is, every one of those defense contractors had their own guys at Edwards to work on those parts of the aircraft. So you couldn't work, despite whatever your role or job was, you couldn't work on a system that belonged to another defense contractor. So, I mean, there'd be times where you'd have like 15 people, different people working on the jet at the same time. Now, as a weapons person, this was very odd to me because typically when you were working on an aircraft, you pretty much had it to yourself, especially if you were loading weapons. If you were like doing something else that didn't involve weapons, you might have crew chief or avionics working on the aircraft, but on the F-22, you'd be loading an AIM-9 and there'd be a guy in the cockpit doing some kind of functional check. There'd be a bunch of people walking on the top of the aircraft doing stuff to the wings. The thing would be in pieces in the hangar, and you're just out there loading out. You're not loading with live munitions, of course, But even on the F-16 or the A-10, even captive munitions, you treat it like they were live munitions, and the same rules apply. No one in the area except weapons when weapons are being loaded. That was out of the door of the F-22. There was just too much work to be done on the F-22 for them to clear out the hangar so that weapons could load on it. So that was just, that was kind of odd. I had to get used to working on this plane with a bunch of other people doing stuff to it at the same time. That was very, very, very odd to me. The second thing I noticed was that this aircraft is very dangerous to work on. Now, all aircraft are very dangerous to work on, and as by some of my other flight line stories, just airplanes in general are just inherently dangerous to work on for a lot of different reasons. But the F-22 just kind of scared me a bit because, one, it's a very large aircraft. It's about the size of an F-15, maybe a little smaller, but it sits much, much lower. I'm talking even with the bay doors closed, you just don't have that much clearance between the ground and the bottom of the fuselage. And the wings are really low, so you're always hunched over. I guess it reminds me of when I didn't work on the F4, but talking to people that had worked on the F4 Phantom, people hated doing maintenance on that jet because it just sat really, really low to the ground, and the F-22 is kind of the same. So as a result, when you're working on the aircraft and its weapons, a lot of our time was spent in the weapons bays, because at the time there were no external configurations for the F-22. There are some now. We've seen pictures of the F-22 with tanks and weapons pylons on, but at that time there was no such thing. It was like in the works. But at that time, I think maybe once or twice I actually saw external pylons on the jet, and even then there weren't anything on the external pylons, not even fuel tanks. I think they were just testing that capability. So most of our time was spent in the weapons bays, either loading AIM-120s, GBU-31s, or installing the racks for the GBUs and the AIM-120s, the AVEL launchers. That's a bit of a redundancy there. So that was the first time I'd ever worked inside of a bay like that. Now, talking to a few friends that worked on the F-117, it was kind of the same thing. You're working in this bay, but the difference is that on this aircraft, like I said before, there'd be a lot of people working on it. So you'd be inside this bay doing something, and some guy might be in the cockpit, and you're just like, please, God, don't let this guy close the bay doors while I'm in here and chop me in half or some shit like that. Because accidents, first of all, accidents always happen on the flight line. People get complacent. Things just happen. But you just knew that something was going to happen on this jet. And there was even one time where a contractor accidentally closed one of the side bay doors while there was hydraulics hooked up on the aircraft. On the F-22, the hydraulics line goes through the side bays. And he just chopped that hydraulic line in half, and it was a big mess. And really nothing came out of it. He came to work the next day. And I tell you, if that had been a military member who had done something like that, it would have been far, far worse for that person. So I was always super, super careful around the F-22, considering my history of just getting bitten by every aircraft I'd ever worked on. The third thing I noticed was that this was a very political aircraft. Like I said, at the time, it was still a test aircraft, and it had been in development since the 80s. And now there was this sentiment from the government and the American public that the F-22 was just a waste of money. Where is it? We've been working on it forever. The Russians and Chinese, their fourth gen fighters are about done. Where's ours? So as a result, once a month, sometimes even more, there'd be a congressman or congresswoman. They would schedule a visit to the base, and they would come over to the F-22 compound, and they would want to see the progress. So these were never surprise visits. We would be alerted to when this was going to happen, because F-22 is classified. You know, they're not just going to let even, you know, members of the government, politicians, just can't waltz into the compound, but they would do the proper security clearance stuff. We'd be informed, hey, Congressperson so-and-so is coming, and it would be a dog and pony show. They'd roll the aircraft out to the flight line, which the F-22, very rarely do I remember it being just parked outside of the hangar in the hot desert, sun exposed to the elements. Normally it was in the hangar unless it was flying. But they'd pull it out of the hangar. They'd make it look all nice. They load it up with weapons, and, you know, the politician would come. They'd give him the tour. They'd let him sit in the cockpit. They show him all the buttons, and which was weird because I couldn't even sit in the cockpit because the aircraft was so classified. I did not have the need to know because I wasn't a 7 level in weapons yet. I was still a 5 level when I started working on the aircraft, so I couldn't sit in the cockpit. But they let these politicians come, sit in the cockpit. They make them feel good, and then you know, they'd give them a brief about the capabilities of the aircraft and testing that they had done and all the things that it could do. And then we'd all go out to the flight line, and the F-22 would take off. It would do like these instant, like the vertical takeoffs, full afterburn. They'd shoot up to like 30,000 feet. They would even break the sound barrier because Edwards is very far away from civilian population. Edwards is, looking up on Google Maps, it is literally in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Mojave Desert. It's about 400 square miles of just desert. And so they break the sound barrier all the time at Edwards. So they would break the sound barrier, and the F-22, you know, you'd get the little mini earthquake from the sound barrier breaking. You know, children would cry, pets going crazy. So they would just put on a show for these politicians and make them feel all warm and fuzzy so they can go back and tell their constituents, oh yeah, the F-22 program is doing absolutely fine. But there was always a push, hey, we got to hurry up and get this thing operational. And I think everyone that worked on the aircraft knew that that plane at that time was just not ready. There is a ton that needed to be done to it. And the reason for that is because this is going to sound crazy, but the irony is that the F-22 was already outdated by aircraft that preceded it. So like, I know that sounds insane, but like the F-16 and the F-18 had already outdated the F-22. The F-22 was created to be an air superiority fighter during the Cold War against Russian fighters that were escorting nuclear bombers to the United States coastline. Well, that threat changed, and really Operation Desert Storm really changed everything about warfare. And the era of the multi-role fighter was born after that. So, okay, so the F-22 was a stealth aircraft that could maintain air superiority and just shoot down anything else in the sky. But really, the F-15C had been doing that for decades and could still do it well. Oh, and by the way, the F-15E could also drop bombs. Hell, the F-16 could fly bar caps and take out radar sites and do close air support. And the F-18 could do the same thing. Why would you want an F-22 if you have these older generation aircraft that can perform multiple roles? Now you've spent trillions of dollars on an aircraft that can only do one thing. Granted, it does it very, very, very well, but it can only do one thing. So the Air Force went back to the contractors and said, hey, we need a multi-role aircraft. It can't be just the F-22. It's got to be the FA-22. And of course, Lockheed and Boeing and everybody came back and said, well, that's going to cost you because that wasn't the original design. And, you know, because the doctrine has changed, it's going to cost you and it's going to take some time. So when I came upon the F-22 program, that's when they were starting to talk about changing the role of the aircraft to have more attack functionality, external pylons, being able to carry bombs inside the internal bays instead of just missiles, things like that. And because of that, not a lot of that functionality had been tested at all. And so, the push to make it operational was like, I don't know how this is going to work out, because it is no longer the aircraft that it was designed to be. I mean, and really by the time I got there, though, a lot, I would say maybe 90% of the testing had been completed, or at least the intended initial testing. And what we did as weapons mostly was figure out the best way to load and maintain this aircraft. There weren't very many technical orders written on the F-22, which was another odd thing. On the F-16, there's a TO for everything. On the F-22, back in 2003, there were almost like no TOs that we followed. You just kind of did everything the best way that you could. There were some very basic TOs that dealt with safety kind of stuff when it came to munitions, but as far as an actual step-by-step procedure for doing things, there really wasn't, because the aircraft was just too new. And for instance, it's very difficult to load weapons on the F-22, or at least it was then, using a jammer, because the aircraft's set so low, and the only way to get a munition inside the bay was to approach the aircraft from the front at roughly a 40 to 45 degree angle and drive the munition straight in at that angle, and then turn the table and then try and line it up, which was difficult because the jammer driver could not see what was going on inside the bay. He just couldn't. So he just had to put it in a general area, and then the one man would kind of guide the rest of the load. This, of course, was very difficult, and we just kind of had to figure out the best way to do it. Now, AIM-120s were also really tough because they were loaded on ejection launchers that we called AVELs, and AIM-120, of course, very long, but it's also very delicate. The radome of the missile is ceramic, so I mean, if you just bump that thing wrong, it will crack, it will break. So you had to be really, really careful when AIM-120 loads. And also, loading the AVELs themselves were really, really difficult, because the way that you normally loaded the ejection launchers, which by themselves were very heavy, you put them on the table of the bomb lift truck, and then you drive the bomb lift truck like you were loading a bomb into the bay, and then you lifted the bomb lift truck table up, but you could only lift it so far, because then it would hit the bay door of the aircraft and cause damage. So unlike a bomb, where you could actually lift it far enough to get it into the rack, or the missile where you could actually extend the AVEL down and get the missile onto it. The AVELs, you had to actually grab it off the table, and then two people had to lift it into position, and then one person is trying to connect it and secure it while the other person is holding it. So it was very clunky, very, very clumsy. It was odd that there was like no TO on this. No one had figured out like a better way to do it. So my flight chief, the weapons flight chief at the time, had actually come up with an idea where he had it was like a cart that had like an extending table on it that had like a manual crank on it, almost like a car jack, okay, but much bigger. And you put the AVEL on that, and you just push it, you just roll it into the bay door, and then you turn the crank, and it would lift the AVEL up. And it was really kind of ingenious, right? He submitted it to the Air Force Ideas Program, and I don't know whatever came out of that, because I ended up leaving the squadron before he heard back on that. But that was the kind of stuff we had to do on the F-22 back then. We just had to figure out the best way in order to work on and maintain the aircraft. Now, let me say, despite all of that stuff about the F-22 that may have seemed kind of negative, like I'm harping on the aircraft, I'm going to say the F-22 is clearly the coolest plane I've ever worked on. I mean, I will always have a personal bias towards the F-16. It was my first airframe. So, I don't even think the F-16 is like the best looking fighter jet ever, although it's very sexy when it's in full C configuration. But, that will just always have a special place in my heart because that was my first airplane. And I love the A-10, of course, because it's just cool. But I mean, the F-22 was awesome. It's like a video game airplane. It really, really is. You get in the cockpit, and I did eventually get my 7 level, so I was able to sit in the cockpit a few times, but it's like playing Ace Combat, I swear. And what's odd about that is that the F-22, because of its age, has a lot of 4th generation aircraft cues in it. The cockpit is very similar to that of like a F-18 or an F-15E, unlike the F-35 cockpit, which is like a giant touchscreen. The F-22 still has a little bit of analog charm to it. So it still feels like fighter aircraft. Feels like you're sitting in like an anime mech or something like that. It's very, very awesome. Also the plane, of course, it looks sexy. Come on now. There was I don't know if it was a running joke or if it was true or just a rumor, but for those who know about the F-22 and the YF-23 competition, the F-23 routinely just outperformed the F-22 in almost every facet. But the Air Force ended up picking the F-22, and the word was that they simply picked the F-22 because it looked cooler. It looked better. YF-23 was kind of ugly. I think now it doesn't look as bad, but it's just F-23 is a very odd looking aircraft. It's got the diamond shaped wings, which the F-22 has, but they look more like traditional wedges than the F-23 had. And the F-23 did not have horizontal stabilizers. It had 2 vertical stabilizers that were angled to perform both functions, whereas the F-22 has horizontal stabs and the giant vertical stabs. But to me, the F-22 looks like the proper evolution of a twin engine fighter aircraft, and it's just gorgeous. It was really cool to go out there and see that thing every day in all of its radar absorbent material covered beauty. Although that radar absorbent material was kind of a bitch to work around, you weren't allowed to use power tools, which generally on the flight line you're not using power tools anyway, but you just had to be very, very careful what you did around the aircraft as not to damage the radar absorbent material, which from what I understand was more durable than the material on the F-117. It was just an awesome aircraft. It was just very cool to be like, hey, people are like, hey, what plane do you work on? I'm like, the F-22. They're like, what, the F-22? You work on the F-22? And I'm like, yeah, I had to walk into the, you have to badge, you have to have a badge to get on the flight line anyway, no matter what aircraft you work on. But to get in the F-22 compound, you couldn't just go onto the flight line. You had to walk through like the security area. You had like this special badge that you swiped, and then you were in the F-22 area, and it was pretty cool. And even then, depending on your need to know, like you might have to stay in the building because it took like the entire. I was at Edwards 2 years, and I worked on the F-22 maybe a year and a half of that time because I did cross train. So it took that entire time for my security clearance to become final. So some days I'd come in, they'd be like, all right, you can now, work on AVALs. And so that's what you're going to do. So I'd go out and work on AVALs, or you can now do this, because it takes time for your security clearance to come through. Before I left, and then this was right after I cross-trained into communications, because actually what happened is I cross-trained into communications, but you actually go back to your squadron for some time until you get new orders. So, so I'd cross-trained into comm, but then I had to go back and finish out being a weapons troop on the F-22. And at this point, it was about to go operational. I think they were going to deliver them to Nellis Air Force Base. So my job in that last few months I was there was very simple. It was to load the chaff flare modules in And when I say that, I mean actually load the cartridges into the modules and then take them out to the jet and load them. And at the time, those were classified because the on most aircraft, the chaff and flare modules are made of like an aluminum or type of metal alloy, whereas on the F-22, they were some composite material that looked like carbon fiber. I don't think it was carbon fiber, because when I saw them, I remember saying, "Oh, cool, carbon fiber," and they were like, "No, it's not carbon fiber. It's something composite." I don't remember the name of it, but it's got like a carbon fiber type weave pattern on it. And so what would happen is, all the planes would come back. They would have expended chaff flare. I would take those modules down, and then I would go into a trailer that was full of chaff flare modules, and then I'd grab all the empty ones, and I would take cartridges from half expended modules and then make full modules with those cartridges. And then I'd have a frag. For those who don't know, the frag is just like a list of the sorties and the munitions that are going to be on the planes flying those sorties. So I'd have my frag, and then in order to make enough for the frag, I would have to then take all the empty modules and go over to the bomb dump, which was kind of cool because I got to drive across the active runway. But drive over to bomb dump, and they would give me new modules. I would give them my completely empty ones. They give me new ones, and I go back to flight line, and then I would load the chaff flare into the F-22s, and I did that for like the last 4 or so months that I was there. So I got regulated to chaff flare duty on the F-22, which wasn't such a bad way to end my weapons career. I guess it was just, like I said, it was just cool being around that plane every day and just being able to say, yeah, I work on the F-22. And it's weird to see that plane now, because now it's in the media, or you go on websites, there's like tons of pictures of it, videos of guys loading it, working on it, and it's just such, it's been in operation for so long now. It's just such a commonplace aircraft. It's no different than seeing an F-15 or an F-16 on the flight line, whereas back in 2003 2005, which is when I was at Edwards, it was top secret, classified. Oh my God, the F-22, can you tell me anything about it? No, I cannot, and I still can't tell you that much about it. So yeah, I do think it's great that actually that plane has gotten some recent media coverage. It finally got a kill. Its first kill was a balloon, and then it shot down 2 UFOs, because that plane was going to go through its very short Air Force career without ever getting a kill. The greatest air superiority fighter ever designed, the greatest one ever built, I think. It's still the F-15, 105 kills and no losses, but the F-22 was just so good, and it never really got a chance to prove it. There was I heard things about what it could do. Sometimes pilots would talk, and I heard a pilot say that the F-22 has the ability to engage 16 targets at once and fire at all of them simultaneously. Now, that math does not add up, but I had other people confirm that, yeah, it could launch at engaged targets simultaneously. So, you could carry, 8 AIM-120s. You could lock up 8 targets and fire at them all simultaneously, which is absurd. That's ridiculous. That is just absolutely ridiculous that it could do that if true. And I don't doubt that it could do that. We don't know if it can do it because it's classified and no one's gonna tell us for certain. But I am telling you that I heard pilots say that that was something that it could do. Also, I talked to pilots that had flown against it. For some reason, we flew a lot of simulated combat against F-15s. I think because they felt like the F-15 was closest to the Sukhoi aircraft, which is kind of like the main adversary that the F-22 would be fighting, or was designed to fight anyway. But an F-15 pilot said that he hated going against the F-22 because by time you saw it, it was too late. It's stealth aircraft, and at that time, stealth and low observability technology was still like super exclusive to the United States. And no one fought mock engagements against the F-117 or even the B-1 or B-2 because they're bombers. So this was like the first time pilots had experience going up against stealth fighter aircraft and pilots saying, hey, I mean, it's crazy that you can't even see it on your radar. Like by the time you see it, the engagement's over. You're dead. And just, hearing the pilots tell those kind of stories about the F-22 was awesome. So I'm glad that, it got a little bit of shine before its upcoming retirement. Yes, the Air Force has said it wants to retire the F-22 because they don't, like I said before, it's outdated. They don't need it. Now the F-35 does everything the F-22 can do, and some of it actually, does better. It can do close air support. It's a true multi-role fighter. It can do strikes. It's still a stealth aircraft, and most importantly, it can be exported to other countries and thus make money. The F-22 cannot be exported and never will be exported because much of it is still very, very classified. I did read a report somewhere stating that there was talk of having the F-22 fill the role that the F-117 once held before its retirement. I think the idea was to have the F-35 fulfill that role, but I mean, you've got 172 F-22s. Even if you retire it, I mean, you really just gonna like send 172 F-22s to the boneyard? Well, of course you would dismantle them. And I just don't. Why not just give it another role and leave it in service like forever? I mean, the B-52 is still flying. The A-10 is still flying. The F-15 is good till 2030. The F-16, they'll probably never get rid of that jet. The Air Force just does not retire aircraft like the Navy does. Even the F-4, I remember they used to use F-4s as like combat drones for missiles. I mean, the F-22 is still gonna fly for a very, very long time. So I say, give it a roll. Let it have some shine, especially since we made the taxpayers pay trillions of dollars over 30 years to develop the coolest aircraft ever. So I'm gonna go back to flying my F-22 here in Falcon BMS actually, and in DCS. DCS has a great F-22 mod, and maybe one day it's gonna be funny. Like one day the jet's gonna be declassified enough for us to get like a proper F-22 simulation, and it's gonna be so not what we expected. I think so, and it won't be any fun because you're gonna engage 8 targets with 8 AIM-120s and win every time. So thanks for listening. I'll be back with more Flightline stories later. If you like what you hear, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Check 6.